Welcome back to Coop's Corner, everyone. Today we're going to be going over a little recap of UFC 325 and what happened on that card. Now, to start off the main card, we had Quinlan Selkid beating Jamie Malarkey by submission in the first round and earning a performance in the night bonus. Then we had Tai Tuivasa losing to Talshin Tashira by unanimous decision. This marks Tai's 6th loss in a row. What happens next with him? I think it's probably for the best if the UFC goes their separate way from him. I definitely do think that with the time Tai has had away from the octagon, he should have. In the third round, he put up a good performance. It was 29-28. But at the same time too, you've had so much time away from the octagon. I think you have to have done something right. He just got wrestled to the ground and looked the same to me. And I think the UFC parts ways with him, or I think it's best if he retires for good. Now, they had Mauricio Rufy beating Rafael Fiziev, which is a great win for Rufy in the second round by TKO. It's a great win for him. It gets him back. It gets him a serious win. It gets him a serious win over a good contender. I wouldn't say contender really, but over someone in the top 10 of the lightweight division. And I think it sets him up perfectly for what's next. What do I think is next? I think personally it will be the loser of who this next fight was, Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker lost to Benoit Saint-Denis in the second round by TKO. Now, I think Mauricio Rufy versus Dan Hooker is a great fight. Dan Hooker is going to go on rank 8, I think. Benoit is going to go up to 6. Rafael is going to go down out of the top 10. Mauricio is going to get into the top 10. Now, at this point, Dan Hooker and Benoit Saint-Denis, I gotta say, what a performance by Benoit. Benoit is, in my opinion, next up for who wins the BMF title in March between Charles and Max Holloway. Do I think the UFC will do that? Maybe not. Maybe they'll give him, I don't know who they would give him in the top 5. Maybe they'll give him Paddy Pimblett. Maybe, but Paddy's going to take some time off for sure. But I think Dan Hooker and Mauricio Rufy is the fight to make. But I do think Benoit deserves a shot in the top 5 now. Now, coming up here, we have Alexander Volkanovski and Diego Lopez, which won Fight of the Night in a very great fight by Volk. Now, Volk showed he still has it, especially after his last performance last April, where he got knocked down. Chin looked very, I don't want to say subtle, but in my opinion, it looked like if Volk were to get knocked down in this fight, he would retire. Volk doesn't look like he's going to retire at all. Now, what do I think is going to happen next? I think it will be Volk versus Mosarv next. It should be. It should be that fight. If it's Laron or anyone else in the division, it is bad. Now, Volk in his post-fight press conference has stated that he's not going to that he doesn't want anyone cutting the line for the title. Now, do I think that's going to go as planned for him? Probably not. I think the UFC will maybe let people cut the line. It's all up in the air what's going to happen next in the featherweight division. But what happens next for Diego Lopez? It's up in the air what happens with him next. I think what is next for him, if the UFC somehow just decides Mosar doesn't deserve it, I think what's up next is either Mosar versus Diego, or if they do give the title shot to Mosar, which they definitely should, it will be Diego Lopez versus Laurent Murphy for Laurent to prove he's the next in line. Now, do I think that's going to be the case where if Diego wins, he's gonna get a title shot. Probably not. He's 0-2 in this he's 0-2 in this series to Volk. So there's no point in giving him another title shot. And if they do, that's bad on the UFC's part. Because if I'm being honest, Diego doesn't deserve it. And now I want to get into some breaking news for the UFC in the past week. We had a UFC 326 fight pulled in Brian Ortega and Renato Moicano. This would have been Brian Ortega's debut at lightweight. Brian Ortega suffered an injury, he said. Well, not suffered, but resting injuries. So he will be pulling out of the fight. What are they going to do with Renato? They booked the fight for him already. And now, for what my most shocking news of the week is, it is that Patchy Mix got released. Now, Patchy Mix getting released is something that I kind of saw coming a little bit. It's not that he didn't deserve maybe a third shot in the UFC. Now, frankly, his time in the UFC was very easy to clown on him because he came in from Bellator, he came in from the PFL, Bellator champion, and was making comments saying that he'd beat anyone in the UFC's bantamweight division, lost to Mario Batista in his debut. Now, realistically, is that a bad loss? Probably not. Now, the reason why I think it wasn't as bad of a loss is because people really gave Mario Batista shit for having won against Jose Aldo in a very, very disputed way. But realistically, it's not a bad loss. Now, Patchy coming in saying he'll be the best, now that makes it a bad loss. Because you promised a lot of shit and you don't deliver on it. That is what makes it a bad loss. So Patchy is going to Ryzen. So that it's gonna be something to see. Now he's 20-3. He lost 2 in the UFC. Lost to a debutant. Now, what's next for the UFC? Next up for the UFC is next numbered event is going to be Holloway versus Oliveira. That fight is a great fight. Now, what happens to the co-main event for UFC 326? Now that Renato and Brian Ortega is pulled. What I think is possible is I think it could be Manel Kape versus... I don't know who they would put. I don't even know who they would put against him. Potentially Tatsuro Taira, since he won against Brandon Moreno. But realistically, Joshua Van and Pantoja will have a rematch. That will be the immediate rematch. With Pantoja not having to have surgery, it will be the immediate rematch. And Pantoja wants to come back sometime in summer, I think it is. Now that is a fight that needs to be booked. What do I think is going to be booked for UFC 326? I think it's only right that we book Tatsuro Taira versus Manel Kape. Because it is 2 fighters. Manel Kape, I'd say, needs to prove that he's reliable to get to a fight. Because he's had so many instances where he's pulled out of the fight. And then Tatsuro Taira, many people questioned his win against Brandon Moreno. People say it was an early stoppage. I think it gets him the validation to get that title shot. That's going to do it all for this week's episode. UFC 325 has passed. Volkanovski is still a champion. And next up for numbered events, we have UFC 326 Oliveira versus Holloway. But next week we have Mario Batista versus Vinicius Oliveira on a UFC fight night. Honestly, these next couple fight nights are pretty decent. Then we have Strickland versus Anthony Hernandez, which is, I think, a great fight for the middleweight division. Then we have Brandon Moreno versus Amabayev. I think it's a great way for Moreno to bounce back, but we'll talk about that when it gets there. So we have 3 fight nights before the next numbered event. That's all for now. Thank you guys very much for watching.